Welcome to the Regenaissance Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Griggs. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Griggs. I'm the host of the Regenaissance Podcast. Today, alongside me, I have Kevin from Radius. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So I guess to get started, because I typically talk with farmers and ranchers and other folks in the ag space, like policy and whatnot, but today I've been looking forward to this because Radius, well, I guess I'll let you describe to the audience what Radius is.
Sure. The short description is Radius is a farmer's market every day. And the longer description is Radius combines the localism and abundance of a farmer's market with the convenience of an everyday grocery store. So all of our perishables are sourced from Texas farms, meat, produce, seafood, baked items, all coming from Texas producers. And we complement that with a curated selection of dry goods, the best from around the world, as clean as possible, so there's no seed oils. There's a long list of ingredients that we avoid as well, but the seed oils is probably the most interesting to this audience. And the goal of that is, I think farmers markets are the best way to shop, but they have some shortcomings. The first and most obvious one is they're usually only open 1 or 2 days a week, and that makes it difficult, especially if they're weekend only. There's lots of people who have jobs that work on the weekend, so they can't shop there. So the first problem to solve is let's make sure it's open every single day. And then the second is usually, at least for me, I would need to go to the grocery store after I went to the farmer's market to get pasta or some spices or whatever that might be. So we bring all that under one roof. We have all the amazing local fresh products from Texas farms with the dry goods that allow you to round out a meal. It's pretty crazy. We have our footprint's about 3,000 square feet. Typical Whole Foods is going to be more like 10,000 plus, but we have every single product category that they do except for home goods. And the reason we're able to get so much in a smaller space is because we just have 1 or 2 of the best products in the category versus Whole Foods has 20, 30 options per category.
I love that you just talked on farmers markets too, because whenever I worked on the farm, we did it 4 days a week, and I ended up becoming the farmers market guy. So I got a lot of experience quickly on the whole world of all of that, and it's a very complex problem trying to figure out how to connect producers with consumers, and farmers market can be one. But there are a lot of problems with farmers markets because, like you said, it's only 1 to 2 days a week. Weather dependent too, so there's days to where it's just pouring down rain, so not only are you just getting rained on constantly, but there's no customers, so you
Right.
don't have any sales at all, and then you've got to go back and you just wasted pretty much a whole day. A lot of farmers markets can be social hour, which
Yes.
is good, but on the flip side, it's just like you're just talking the whole time and not actually supporting farmers and ranchers. And then 4, I know that some farmers markets, it's kind of gotten co-opted to where some of the vendors are still not that great, and to where you actually find out that they just buy produce from an actual grocery store. But on the flip side of that, I had so many incredible experiences at the farmers market, talking to customers, especially the farm I was on had incredible shiitake mushrooms, and so I was always looking forward to having those conversations because I would help pick all of that and whatnot. So it was really cool. And then thinking about going, because I went to Radius, this was 2-3 weeks ago, and the very first thing I saw, which we've talked about, was there's just a little table with peaches, and I think the pack had about 10 of them, and I ate them all within 24 hours because the taste of it was so incredible. I think about that a lot from grocery stores too, is the taste of produce, because you brought up a good point before we started, just talking on grocery stores and why I was talking on Sprouts and talking about prepackaged goods, how a lot of times when we go to grocery stores, a lot of focus is prepackaged goods, and it should be the inverse, but it made me think about the actual taste and quality of produce in a lot of these stores, to where half the time I buy it, there's no taste at all. I remember a couple weeks ago, I bought some pomegranate, and there's literally no taste, and I bought 4 packets of that, and so I literally just tossed it out.
Yeah.
Because it makes me think about, typically, if there's no taste, then there's really no nutrients in it, so I'm just kind of wasting all of that. So I know this is kind of a long-winded rant, but my next question with that would be then, with Radius, whenever you were just in the beginning phases and whatnot, how did you go about figuring out the sourcing of everything? Because this is very complex, obviously.
It is complex, but I think when I give you the answer, people will be like, "Oh, that's actually not that hard." So I spent a lot of time trying to make it simple. But before I answer that, just talking about why does produce not taste like much anymore, and we can talk about this in more detail. But the way I would give a simple answer is most produce in America is designed for transportation, not flavor. And when you look at the genetics, the breeds that are selected, they're optimized for water weight that's easier to transport. The um, the other big thing about that is they are picked, like the age of them, they're picked when they are not ripe so that they're able to stay more stable in transportation. So there's a bunch of reasons why when you have a global or national supply chain, the flavor diminishes because everything is optimized for transport, not for flavor, versus our peaches are picked and in our store 24 to 48 hours later, which is pretty amazing. Okay, so then to answer your question, what was your question?
It was just talking on with
Sourcing.
yeah.
Yeah. So the simple answer is I just found other businesses that have already done the sourcing work, and I paid the owners consulting fees to help us out. So there's a restaurant here in Austin called Dai Due. It's probably the leading farm to table restaurant, one of, if not the leading farm to table restaurant in Austin. And the owner, Jesse Griffiths, we consulted with him to understand what farms he was working with, and he's built those relationships over 10 years and knows where the quality is. So that was a head start. Also, Trisha Bates, she runs something called Field Guide Festival, where she brings together local Texas farmers and local chefs and matches them up, and it's this amazing, like basically tasting festival. But every year it's probably 20 to 30 farmers of the best farmers. And so again, worked with her to figure out who their source, who she thinks the most highly of, and sources from in her event. So those two relationships were a really great starting point to build a farmer network. And then from there, asking each farmer, okay, you grow produce, but who do you think raises the best chicken in Central Texas? And it was effectively a networking exercise from there, and filtering based on tastings to see who actually had the best products. So it was a fun exercise. And when I think about, does it make sense? How difficult would it be to have radii in multiple cities? The hardest part is building the sourcing relationships, but I'm not afraid of that. I don't think having gone through it, I think we could do it again in other regions.
So you've explained what Radius is and then how you've gotten the connections to just the local communities. What was the impetus behind wanting to start this?
Yeah, there's a bunch of reasons. The simplest one is I worked in tech beforehand and took about like 18 months off after my previous company. And I spent most of my time hobby-wise cooking, and it's something I've developed just a really strong interest in. And I realized that I hated going to the grocery store, and my cooking was good, but not great because the quality of ingredients that I was getting was kind of shit. So I would go to farmers markets in Austin on Saturdays, but they were mostly vendors, not farmers, and there wasn't much produce, and the meat was all frozen and plastic wrapped. So I didn't really want to be cooking. I thought I could find much better ingredients than that. So the reason I started Radius is to solve my own problem and build the farmer's market that I wanted to go to, the grocery store that had only clean ingredients, so I don't need to read labels. So that's the kind of the main reason. And then just a few others. Maybe a second one is I felt kind of alienated from humanity. I guess that sounds more extreme than I mean it to. Working in tech, where you would interact with a user based on it's called a UUID, a unique identifier. So all of our phones have a 16-digit unique identifier. It was pretty dehumanizing, and I wanted to work in a business where I could see the customer and get feedback from them face to face, not over a Zoom screen or not through a anonymized user identifier, and just really do something that was tangible instead of abstract again. I'm sure like I'll do another tech thing at some point, so I'll eat my words. But at least for now, I just really wanted to touch and feel and experience business in a more local, tangible way.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious then how I can best phrase this question, because I think about this all the time with just regenaissance is having to help. Well, so in order for our food system to change to where we need to go, we definitely need a massive paradigm shift. Because one of the things that we are so accustomed to now is convenience and just ease of access. Expected to have every type of produce available year round and whatnot. And so there's really, if we want to get stuff, say like with raw milk, there's a lot of friction points still. And so if we're trying to get really high quality food, there's still a lot of friction points, which is why I like what you're doing with Radius, because that makes it much easier for folks to have better access. But then you think on the scale of America, it's a very difficult problem, because I think about like Whole Foods and Sprouts and these other large grocery store chains that try to provide good quality food, paired with whenever I've driven around rural America to where there's, little farm stands and whatnot. How do I even best phrase this question? Because from your perspective, how can we help drive consumers to start caring about the food too? Because I know there's just so much media, social media, that just so much information going on constantly, the stress of actual work and everything. So there's just so many distractions or stressors. So it makes it hard to want to go to even a farmer's market or something like that.
Yeah. So there's three different, you touched on a lot of things. So I think there's three different topics to help answer the question. So make sure I keep track of them. First is convenience. The second is flavor. And the third is homogeneous versus heterogeneous food. And I think these are important. So I'll start with flavor. You asked the question, how do you get consumers to care? Products that are raised the right way taste better. So I think flavor is maybe the simplest answer. What you were talking about with the peaches.
Yeah.
It's a kind of mind-blowing experience when you eat a grocery store peach that doesn't taste like much. It's really hard, and you kind of have to let it ripen on your counter, and it never does. Versus you come into Radius, and they're already ripe. You can eat it from the store, and it is bursting with flavor. You're like,
and to listeners, it was unreal. I literally stopped what I was doing, because I also think about whenever I first visited a ranch back in 2022, and I stayed with the family, and they cooked from their beef from out back, and then they had a nice fresh garden, and that was literally a life-changing meal, because I was 27 and realized I've never had any food that tastes like this ever. And it's hard to describe if you've never actually had that food. So that's why this flavor part is so crucial, because we've always now equated healthy food equals not good tasting. Could not be further from the truth at all.
Exactly. I think every single food group, you can have that experience. Whether it's like, I had celery the other day. I'm like, I don't know if I like this celery because it tastes like too much. Versus the celery you get in the grocery store, it's just water.
Yes.
So now I'm like, okay, I need to change how I use celery, because it actually has a tremendous amount of flavor. The beef that we have, the chicken that we have, everything has depth and terroir. But the standard grocery store complex, I guess, tries to make things as homogeneous as possible. So I think that's the kind of the next part I want to talk about is when you go into a Whole Foods, there is always broccoli, there's always zucchini, there's always peppers. In order to have consistency like that, you really need homogeneity. And I think milk is a really good example too. Pasteurization is a technique to provide homogeneity. So no matter what type of quality milk comes in, it gets pasteurized and you get basically the equivalent product coming out. Versus a food system that embraces heterogeneity is seasonal. You're not always going to have broccoli when you come into Radius. It's going to be whatever is in season and raised by the local farmers. The milk is going to taste different at different times of the year based on the grass that the cows are eating. Everything has variability, but our food system today is built to shove it down one channel that makes it homogeneous. So, and I think in Europe, that level of terroir and heterogeneity is embraced, which is great. And I think we can do that in America too. So that's what I would say about homogeneity and heterogeneity. We need to embrace heterogeneity more.
Definitely. I like that so much. Just thinking on over time, I have a feeling there will be grocery stores like or stores, or I guess would you call Radius a grocery store? What would you? Because I don't want to.
Yeah, I struggle with this. There's actually an article, I'm not sure if you saw in the New York Times last week, about like a farm stand in Ann Arbor, Michigan, saying, "Is this the future?" Is this the future? So farm stand is kind of there's not a really good word for it's an everyday farmer's market.
Yeah,
but I don't know. We also have all the grocery component to it. There's not a good word. If you come up with a good word, let me know though.
But yeah, just going back to just the seasonality aspect, that's so crucial. Because I also remember, again, going back to the farm I worked on, the tomatoes, for example, they just look like Frankenstein tomatoes because they were just these huge, all kinds of different colors. I had never been exposed to anything like that. And I remember going to the nearby town to the grocery store just to, I forgot what I needed to get, but I remember the first thing I noticed when I walked in of the produce were tomatoes, but they were just the GMO shiny red tomatoes.
Yeah, slicers.
And they all had the same color. They all looked the same. And that just blew my mind. And I bought one of those and compared the taste. Not even close.
It's great. And that's a perfect example of the food system is designed for homogeneity. And it's easier to transport those tomatoes. Yeah. And that's why they've become the predominant breed.
And now this has just added a very massive problem too, is the consumers latch on to expecting that to be the same thing every time.
Exactly.
And so, because I experienced this a lot in the farmers markets too, were comments from folks of why produce looked like this or that versus the neighbors to where they were just conventionally using GMO.
Yep, exactly.
And yeah, it's very tough because the toughest part is getting them over that hump, because once you actually taste it and
exactly.
then you have those realizations and then the wheels just start spinning. But
exactly.
It's pretty much 0 to 1 on that.
Yeah, it's the flavor. It's that bite of a tomato. Like we have something called they're black cherry tomatoes. They're stupid how good they taste. It's insane. You can't go back to a slicer tomato after you have that. One last thing I wanted to say is I do think it's actually, we still do need to make this experience convenient for consumers.
Yes.
So I definitely believe in heterogeneity and diversity and seasonality. And I believe in convenience. And that's kind of the essence of Radius, is making that experience of getting flavorful products convenient and approachable so that you can replace going to Whole Foods with going to Radius instead. If it's not convenient, customers won't do it. So that, I think that is kind of the elegant job of business, is to figure out what consumers want that's difficult and make it more convenient and approachable. And that's the goal with Radius, at least.
Now, whenever you were, I guess, up until you launched a couple months back, how long from the idea of all this to actual launch did this take for you?
A little over a year. So I'd been thinking about it. I guess that was the summer of, what year is it? 2023. And then December of 2023 is when I really started working on it. And then we opened in March 2025. Yeah, 2 months ago. So yeah, a little over a year, and that's from really starting effort, all the architecture process, construction, figuring out the farmer relationships, all of that. In the grand scheme of things, I think it's pretty quick.
Yeah.
I think coming from a tech background, there is a sense of urgency and a productivity level that's helpful to bring into grocery. So I think we probably did it quicker than most would have.
Yeah, no, I love that. Because I also just think about, too, going back to like the farm stand topic too, is thinking just again on that of the national scale, especially on the outskirts of bigger cities. How can we have farm stands or stores that, because if you go out in the rural country, a lot of farms might have like a tiny little stand, but it's just a couple of their own products. How can we get the collective community that have different products, different types of meat and whatnot, into a store near a good, because you're in a good location to
Hmm.
where it's pretty much a lot of the heart of Austin, especially the types of folks that would, yeah, I would say it's in a good location. And so how can we solve that on the rest of the country too?
Yeah.
Because also with the convenience, but then just like the whole trust aspect too, because then there's a lot of like self-service stands,
Yep.
but then it's starting to get less trustworthy as a society to where a lot of them just get raided by just random people. And so then that kind of crushes that. Um, yeah, I think about that a lot because
Yeah.
again, that whole, it's just 0 to 1. Once they actually have that food, then it changes the whole game.
It's a great question. I don't have a good answer to it. I do think you need a different store form factor in an urban setting versus a suburban it's really more urban versus rural. I do think you would need a much smaller form factor. We're also a whole animal butchery shop. I don't think you could do that in a smaller form factor, so you probably would need to break down the animals and vacuum seal and freeze, which is perfectly fine. That's how a lot of meat is sold. It's not my preferred experience, but I agree with you. I think there's kind of some sort of hub and spoke model where you have the main stores in the urban setting, and then you have kind of the spokes that are a smaller footprint where you have a smaller selection. Everything is more shelf stable, so frozen. Um, but I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I don't. We'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see what happens. But it also is cool that there are farms in those communities that have their own farm stands. It's not a curation of all the local farms, but still,
Yeah.
there's at least a good option. Everywhere, almost everywhere, has the ability to get local fresh produce if you look hard enough.
I like that. What was the question I had? I just had it off the top of my head. With oh yeah, back to the you mentioned on with the animals that you butcher the whole animal. Is how do you go about that? You buy like a whole cow
Mm-hmm.
and then just butcher it and then just sell. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So each week we get between 2 and 3 whole cow carcasses. Um, they come in either quarters or eighths, so you don't get. It's pretty hard to move an entire cow carcass. But we have a rail, so we put the quarter or eighth on the rail, and then push it along, break it down off the rail into smaller primals and subprimals, and then those get broken down into the cuts, and then we have trim that gets turned into ground beef. And that's true for beef, it's true for pork, it's true for lamb. We get whole chickens too and break those down. That's a lot easier. Um, but I think the cool thing about it is much harder to be a whole animal butcher shop because 80% of the people that come in the doors want New York strips, ribeyes, and filet mignon. And there's just only so much of that per carcass. So we take a lot of pride in our customer service and being friendly, approachable butchers. And when someone comes in and really wants a ribeye, we can say, like, sorry, we don't have ribeyes. We've sold all them out. But these are alternative cuts that will give you a similar eating experience. It's not the same exact thing as a ribeye, but we can get kind of close, whether it's a toro steak or a delmonico or whatever it might be. So I think that's one cool thing, is it really is an educational process with the consumer. The second thing is, and I think this is a really underappreciated part of the food system, is it really breeds a culture and philosophy of utilization. So we use every part of the animal. The trim gets turned into ground beef or chili or really those are the two main ones. And then all the bones, we create bone broths. So the same way that people who are on homesteads, whether it's today or in the past, really appreciate the animal and utilize every aspect of it, we bring that to the consumer as well. So our bone broths are made in house, and they're really,
They're so good.
really good.
Yes.
So whole animal butchery really breeds this ethos of utilization, and we're going to start bringing that to other aspects of the business as well, where fermentation and dehydration and smoking are all these traditional preservation and utilization techniques. So at the end of a season, a farmer might have excess, whatever it might be, excess peppers or tomatoes or zucchini. Our goal is to help them utilize that product. So we're going to start a fermentation and pickling program so that you can be, yes, you might not be eating fresh zucchini all year because it's a seasonal product, but the way you solve that is through preservation techniques like fermentation. So I think that's an aspect of Radius that we haven't really leaned into yet, but I'm extremely excited about it. It's going to be cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I like that a lot because you have to have cool creative ways too to get folks to be interested in all that too. I like the approach that you have with the other cuts of meat because I think about that too. It's whenever I was on the farm again, I had exposure to all the other cuts I've never ever had in my life.
Yeah.
And it's very delicious. There's a lot that have, I'm trying to think the best meal I had was, it was one of the cuts. I can't even remember the name now, but I just remember having that with so many of the fresh peppers from that farm, along with, because this was now in the fall, so they had all kinds of squash.
Yeah.
And so, it's just
so
so
good.
much better, and you feel so much better. That's another thing too. You don't
Yeah.
feel like heavy. I mean, obviously, unless you overeat, but like I felt so much better.
Yeah, it's wild. It really is wild. Like your body knows what is good, and we can use our intuition.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be so. I mean, there's definitely a place for data and being data driven, but you can listen to your body.
Yeah.
My friend Justin Mares wrote a blog post about just like musings on diet advice, and he had two really good conclusions. One is things that have been around a really long time are probably pretty safe. So basically the Lindy effect. So your diet should be Lindy.
Mm-hmm.
And the second is trust your body. Like if you're eating gluten and you feel like shit, stop eating gluten. But listening to an outside expert about what feels best for your body isn't going to help. So everybody is different. Everybody's going to have different reactions. So I think those two guidelines for how to eat healthy for you are really great.
Number two is very crucial because that's, again, going back to, we've outsourced. I've talked about this previously on the podcast. We've outsourced all of our responsibility and personal responsibility. And so paired that with just all of these experts, or what we feel like are experts online, talking about XYZ with food, and then comparing that with us, I don't know, we've kind of lost the confidence of trusting our intuition, especially with food, because I agree wholeheartedly on, you need to listen to your body, because it's not all black. Because that's another thing. All conversations now, because of our education, is just black and white. There's no nuance in anything, except there actually is nuance in everything.
Yeah.
And especially with your food, because you could be eating blueberries, but someone else might not be able to digest that.
Yeah.
But also that person could heal whatever's going on and eventually start eating blueberries. Like, you have to really listen to your body.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Even you are different from everybody else, and you are different from past versions of you.
Yes.
So things can change over time. So, I'm a very strong believer in pluralism and heterogeneity, and embracing that there's different ways to eat, ways to live, and we need to trust what our bodies are telling us. I'm sure. Have you read Fred Provenza's work about? He has this amazing. It's a book called Nourishment, and he basically, I might butcher this, so hopefully people can give me some grace. Raised, I'm pretty sure it was either sheep or goats. I can't remember. But the study showed that the animals would seek out different types of grasses and forage based on what nutrients they were deficient in. So they were able to intuitively fix their deficiencies, which I think is true for us. I saw you drinking an Element. You kind of know when you're deficient in salt and electrolytes,
Yes.
and you start to crave it.
I mean, that's with chocolate too. I'm pretty sure it's magnesium. Like, there's certain foods that you're craving. That's because you're craving certain vitamins and minerals.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind when I thought about that too. Is like certain food, like that's another thing too. Is yeah, it's crazy to think that certain foods. I don't know. To me, that blows my mind. That
Yeah.
it's a very intuitive, smart system.
It is, and we like the same way that these sheep or goats. I'm sorry, I can't remember which. Were able to do it intuitive. Like we that's the same for us too. We are animals that are intuitive, as long as we're able to listen to that intuition. Our bodies are insanely cool.
And to me, that's also not to be tinfoily hat, but to me, that's also why we are gaslit so much by the powers that be because of that, wanting us to be as dependent on them as possible and not questioning a lot.
I think another really good book, Mark Schatzker. Have you read his stuff, The Dorito Effect?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's another one that's really interesting. But it's both tinfoil hatty, but also pretty intuitive that the companies would be designing foods that kind of take advantage a little bit of our genetic wiring,
Oh yeah.
where there are things that you can do to create more craving. So I'm a capitalist and I defend capitalism, but there are profit-seeking motivations that create perverse outcomes, and I think we definitely experience that with processed food designed to increase consumption.
Which is why I like that you're so focused on the flavor aspect too, because like for me, I grew up having bad food habits, eating all junk food. I'm talking Pop Tarts for breakfast, cereal, um, literally 2 sodas a day, so many chips and cookies and
Yeah.
everything, and that stuff is very tough to break. Like that's why I try to give grace to the folks that are quite unhealthy and are trying to take the changes. But whenever my brother died, I really went back to just being emotionally eater, because that's what I think about too. Is 75% of this country is very unhealthy, and a lot of people are eating as an escape. And then you combine that with the fact that these ingredients and everything, they're literally trying to make us more addicted to these foods. It's a very tough problem to break. So how can you break that? Well, you have a nice peach, and then you actually feel incredible. And so I think about that a lot too, because I truly believe too, a lot of very unhealthy people, they are just have some trauma that they've never overcome, and food is kind of their escape.
Yeah.
And it's a very difficult escape to be a part of, because man, it took me. That's how I destroyed my body after my brother died. Not just from the stress and everything, but literally I was just gorging myself with garbage.
Yeah.
And not only that, then you're worsening your mind, and then you're worsening your gut, and obviously that's the connection there, and you're just rinse
spiral.
repeat. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to break.
Yeah, and so then whenever I was on that farm
Yeah.
and I worked on there, I had 100% of my diet was there. I never once thought about junk food.
That's amazing. Wow.
Not a single time,
Yeah.
because the food tasted incredible.
Yeah.
Uh,
And you're outside, and so
Yeah,
you create
you're
this
outside.
positive feedback loop instead of a negative one.
Literally, I would walk outside, and in the front yard, they had a grapevine. So I just walk up, grab some grapes.
That's
Some of the
amazing.
best grapes to this day I've ever had.
I'm sure.
I come back
Warm.
during lunch, just continue to grab grapes
Yeah.
and whatever. And then that's why I always go back to people need to go visit a farm or ranch, because you just have no idea what you've been missing your whole entire life.
There's some crazy statistic that if you ask 100 kids where do carrots come from, like 5 can answer what it looks like to grow a carrot. And so we've become, again, I think this is like homogeneity. We become so abstracted from how our food is grown that you just expect this bright orange carrot and don't know anything about the way it's produced. And if it's not this perfect shape, then you put it somewhere else, which is just crazy to me. I think your story about being on the farm, I think, is really powerful. It's so difficult to change habits, and my wife and I have this saying when one of us is struggling. It's you change the environment to change the self, rather than expecting a tremendous amount of willpower to. If you're surrounded by Pop-Tarts, you're gonna eat Pop-Tarts. It's true for me too. If we have junk food in the house, I'm gonna eat it.
Yep.
So don't put it in the house. But I think your kind of transformative experience was about changing the environment and getting you to a new place And I think that's really powerful and experience to learn from.
Yeah, and that's also why. So my bio and everything with Regenaissance, it's talking about education, but the first part is raising awareness, because that education's cool, but the awareness aspect is crucial for them to even actually want to educate themselves. And that's true too, with just, again, going back to the food and the quality of it all. So I'm curious, then, going back to whenever customers go in and say they want a steak, I'm just curious, how has that reception been like whenever that experience happens? Have they been trying other cuts, or
Yeah, I think most do. Some definitely don't. They're like, oh, let me, like, how do I make sure I get my filet next time? And I'm like, okay, you can pre-order and we can make that happen for you. I will say the people who are open to a different steak go home and cook it and their minds are blown, just like you were talking about. We have a customer for life. So the 80% that are excited to try something new really get into it. And it's the same exact thing we were talking about when you try an amazing peach or an amazing strawberry. When you try a different type of cut that you've never had before, it's a pretty cool, mind-blowing experience that there's diversity out there, and we shouldn't be eating the same type of things every single day, every single week.
yeah, no, I agree. What was my next question then? This continues to happen. I had a question right after what you're saying.
One thing I wanted to get your thoughts on, kind of a theory I've been thinking about that I think you would be interested in, and it pertains to raw milk. I am open-minded to whether or not people want to drink raw milk or not. I understand all the perspectives. I do think pasteurization, when it was required originally, is because the farming practices were bad. So if you have cows raised in dirty environments, you can get bacterial infections, and that will go into the milk.
Mm-hmm.
When you are selling and producing raw milk and you're testing for bacterial strains, it forces really good, clean farming practices. So there's actually a bunch of places in the food system where we rely on processes at the end of the farming process that hide bad farming practices. And I think pasteurization is a really good example of that, where, like, if you just do the farming and ranching the really clean way, you don't need pasteurization.
That's what's happened with a lot of pasteurized milk. Not like Kona or Alexander Family Farms, but like a lot of the bigger dairies, they don't give a crap about the conditions, and because they know they're just going to pasteurize it and really heat it up to extremely high temperatures.
Yeah. So you have this fail-safe, which protects the consumer, which is a good thing, but it also...
Do you think it protects the consumer?
Pasteurization?
Because a lot of times they can still end up getting sick from that, especially when the dairy that I'm talking about, the ones that they end up adding vitamins in just because it's been devoid of everything that
I think if you were to drink that milk unpasteurized, it would be way worse.
Okay, you're right.
But
it might kill you.
Yeah. So I get that it protects the consumer from bad milk, but I agree with you that it harms the consumer overall.
Yeah.
In that it allows bad farming practices, and then you need to enrich the milk and everything. So it's this weird, when you look at something from a local, or like a local maxima, you're protecting that bottle of milk. But when you look at it from a global maxima, you're reducing the quality of milk in America overall. And that is, again, for homogeneity and risk reduction. So rather than saying all raw milk, some people will get sick, they're not going to die, but 99.9% of the experience will be better, it'll be more nutrient rich, it'll be more flavorful, and we accept that there's a 0.1% chance that there might be a negative reaction, versus now we're saying it's just 80% shit, or like, let's just say 80% good, we'll say positive, it's 80% good, and we just embrace that we have a homogeneous result that's 20% worse than if we allowed for heterogeneity. So I don't know if that's articulated very well, but we are so focused on risk reduction and homogeneity that we don't allow for better products to actually come to market.
With raw dairy, why I've been so focused on that, to me, it's about control. Because going back to the whole nuance thing, we're always told that raw milk, back in the 1800s, we're killing a lot of children in industrialized cities, which was true. No one ever talks about what was actually happening during that time. So in rural America, it was fine. There weren't all these crazy deaths like in the big cities.
Right.
But then you look into the bigger cities. So one, the sanitation aspect's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, there's horse and buggy, so there's literal horse shit everywhere. So that brought flies and rampant disease. No refrigeration or electricity for a lot. There was no semi trucks with the modern technology that we have. But then lastly, like you said, the conditions. So the whole swill milk case, which was huge. So before the war of 1812, we had a lot of whiskey coming from England, but then at the end of that, they stopped that. So a lot of whiskey distilleries propped up. And so take New York. I think they had 5,000 to 7,000 distilleries. But then over time, they were struggling to make do. So they were trying to have value added stuff. So what they did was they added cows to the back. And they put them in these confined concrete jungles, essentially. No sunlight, no grass. And they would feed them leftover grains. Why would they do that? To up the production of milk,
Right.
which worked. But then it would produce this blue pus-filled milk called swill milk. And obviously, whenever you're going to sell that to people, that's going to make people sick.
Yeah.
But then, especially for children, to where that's just a disaster. So a lot of people were dying. And so to me, yes, that I would not personally ever drink that milk, but I'm a huge proponent of raw milk. And so when I think about, I've had Mark McAfee on my podcast
Yeah,
twice
he's
now,
great.
and he's the founder of Raw Farm, but also Raw Milk Institute, to where they're doing a lot of research. But he's got his own science team that does constant testing. Again, going back to there's refrigeration. He talks about what he does as soon as they get the milk, and then tests it, and then the transportation. All of these measures to ensure high quality and safety standards. I am a huge proponent of all that. I mean,
Yeah.
I prefer raw milk, but I also, above all else, we should just have the freedom to choose between the two. I mean, this goes into the conversation then of should raw milk be at the scale of, say, Raw Farm, having the raw milk for all the East Coast. That's a different conversation. But yeah, to me, we deserve the freedom and rights to choose from that. And so why I think it's been so polarizing, why it's pretty much illegal in a lot of places, is to me about control and money.
I think it's a interesting case study because raw milk done well promotes really great farming practices and local supply chains. And I think the next generation of the American food system are those two things, where whether it's milk, whether it's meat products, whether it's produce, we want amazing farming practices that reduce chemicals and maximize nutrient density. And we want a small supply chain so we can get products from the field to the shelf as fast as possible so their nutrients and flavor don't decay.
And that's happening more and more with raw dairy, because I follow that every day. And so I see whenever states are, trying to introduce new bills or passing bills. And so that exact thing is happening, to where consumers are starting to understand that with specific raw dairy farmers. They start appreciating the actual taste and quality of the dairy, but then also the practices. And so that harmonious, it's awesome to me, or for me, to where I believe that it is trending in the right direction. But then again, there's still powers that be, like North Carolina. They're still in the middle of this farm bill, but they almost tried. Well, it still could potentially be to where it's completely illegal. Why? I still believe, again, it's power and control.
Yeah.
Because they also try. When I say they, whoever's trying to make it as this big bad boogeyman and wanting it to be illegal, is they go on the whole sick aspect, but then you look at the statistics of it all, and it's just hogwash.
Yeah.
That's just another thing too, of why I try to tell people to go visit the farm and ranch, compare what we're told online versus actual reality.
Yeah. If you were to go to a farm producing raw milk safely versus a dairy, I'm not even going to call it a farm, a dairy producing milk at scale, you can pretty easily understand what milk you should be drinking. What you
could probably even just from the smells alone.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious then. So for all of the farms and ranches you've partnered with, do you go out and visit all of those?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, definitely. And you can, we ask farmers a bunch of due diligence questions, and you can just see their fields and what they look like, whether they're raising animals or produce. Produce is harder to intuitively understand because clean, very hygienic, clean beds don't necessarily mean that the practices are better versus where the animals are outside and it's really clean is pretty obvious.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean it's a core part of the business is we do the farmer due diligence and visits so that customers don't have to visit 50 different farms.
So what's that feeling like then when, just thinking on all those farms and ranches, just developing these relationships, but then also being able to provide all of that food to local community in Austin?
The local community aspect is definitely the most gratifying. Having a grocery store is difficult, more difficult than I actually thought. I think you need to be naive to start things like this. So I definitely was, and it's really difficult. But it's when I hear from you about the amazing peaches or whatever it might be, if like people coming in and saying this is the best chicken stock I've ever had, it always makes those moments may outweigh any bad days that we have, and we certainly have bad days.
That's literally how it is as a farmer too. God, that's so spot on. I wasn't even the owner and all of that, so I can still understand trying to be in their shoes. But even doing all the backbreaking work and then hearing the customers rave about
It makes
like
it
in the
worth it.
shiitake mushrooms, you're like, yes.
Yeah, I'll keep doing this for you. And then on the farmer side, because I didn't come from a hospitality or farm background at all, I had to like amp myself up to be comfortable looking like an idiot when I would ask questions about like, what's your grazing plan? And a lot of the times I wouldn't really understand the answers in the beginning. And yeah, you just kind of have to keep going and be
Yeah,
comfortable looking like a dumbass.
how did you get over that hump? Because that's another big problem for folks. It is intimidating because I say, shake the rancher's hand and whatnot. But again, going back to the friction, that's a lot of friction because say you take someone in their 40s who have never been to a farm or ranch
Yeah.
and now they've got to talk to a farmer or rancher. And we have these preconceived ideas of who a farmer or rancher is. And so whenever you're just so disconnected from all of that, making a phone call to one could be very intimidating, and
Yeah.
even more intimidating is going to visit them and talking to them.
It's true.
So yeah, I guess how for you were you able to?
You got, at least for me, I needed to hype myself up a little bit to
Yeah.
get over it. I will say 75% of the farmers and ranchers are extremely generous and understanding and will not make you feel dumb. So it was really helpful to have positive experiences so I would feel more comfortable moving forward. And then just conversation by conversation, I became less ignorant and more comfortable with those conversations. But I mean, I'm still learning and understanding farming and ranching more every single day and asking questions that are dumb and feeling okay looking dumb. Because for every dumb question I ask from a place of kind of a blank slate, some of those questions, because I have fresh eyes, are more powerful and more interesting. So yeah, but it definitely takes a level of humility to understand that I don't know the answers, and I'm just here to learn. It's been fun though.
I think that's interesting too. Now that we're just talking like on just the whole aspect of just learning and asking questions, and then going back to how everything's just been so black and white, and it makes me think about schooling. How most people we've just become so sterilized once we leave school, which is kind of funny because leaving school should be the complete opposite. And so in a way, connecting back with a farmer rancher kind of brings back the just curious mind that I've always kept that curiosity. So, but I've noticed from a lot of people that just has been completely stifled. But I don't know, to this can just bring a new.
It's a very safe space to be curious.
And that's why I also say that to me, the root of all of humanity's problems is our disconnection from our food. I'm not saying that that's going to solve everything, but even like just the whole human aspect of being curious, testing things out, having conversations like that, it's very minimal now. Everything's on our cell phones.
Yeah.
Nothing's in person, and learning and all of that, and asking questions, feeling like a fool, but going with it still.
I think one of the things I love most about food is the stakes are very high over a long time span, and the stakes are extremely low on a short time span. What I mean by this is if you eat a shitty zucchini, it doesn't matter at all. Like if you try a recipe and it sucks, it doesn't matter at all. You're going to cook the next day. If you're a farmer and you plant something and it doesn't work, yes, it sucks, but there's another season that comes. So over a long time span, understanding your food and nourishing your body is extremely important. But you have so many iterations of it that if one of those fails, it doesn't matter. And it is a cool place to be curious and iterative because the stakes in each moment are so low. That's what's fun to me about cooking is if you make something that sucks, you're going to make dinner again tomorrow, and it's okay.
I love that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious then, transitioning a little bit, because you mentioned it was a good thing you were kind of naive in going to it all, and there's just a lot of lessons learned. What are just some of the struggles through starting all of this?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think the most profound learning for me is coming from a tech background. I never needed to think. I was able to only focus on the business and our products. In a brick and mortar physical business, the physical aspect is just as complicated as the business aspect. So the construction process, our refrigeration, all of our HVAC, all of the electrical requirements, I'm cognitively managing the physical infrastructure just as much as I'm spending time on the business itself. And yes, that's because we just opened and things need to get refined, but I fully expect it to always be attention where I'm always worried about our refrigeration. So that is, in retrospect, very obvious, but different for me. And I would have spent a lot more time during the construction process. I was thinking a lot about customer flow and layouts and aesthetics and how to make the farmers prominent. I should have spent just as much time on the infrastructure decisions themselves. So for the next location, I know a lot more about refrigeration now, not by choice, but so I'll be spending a lot more time on that kind of stuff. Where if someone was coming into this with 20 years of grocery experience, they would have known. But the nice thing about not coming in with 20 years of grocery experience, I created a different experience for the customer, and that's what people really take from Radius. They don't think about, hey, does your refrigeration suck? They don't see that part, but that for the next build out, definitely will be spending more time on that.
I'm curious then, has there been anything that's been really surprising in a good way since launching this?
It's a good question. I don't know about. I think I was pretty confident that the business model would be attractive to the local community and we'd get a lot of people coming in. So I'm not surprised by that. I'm very grateful and pleased, but not surprised. I guess one thing, it's not profound, but I spent a lot of time thinking about the layout and aesthetics. And
I was going to ask on that too, because when you mentioned like the square footage, it's tough for the consumer or the audience to understand what it looks like too.
yeah,
So you only have just that X amount of space. How can you really utilize that to?
yeah. And how do you design it in a way that matches the experience of creating a seasonal meal? And that's the flow we designed. Is my belief for like there is a learning curve to cooking seasonally. Most people start with a recipe and then go shop to the grocery store and get everything. But when you're a seasonal grocery store, you can't make a dish that's dependent on peppers when there aren't peppers growing. So it flips the experience where you should go to the grocery store first, to Radius first, and then design your dish. So the way that I think about it and recommend, and I'm not a professional chef, I'm like an above average home cook, so it's a simplistic model, but I think will be helpful for people, is you start with you start with the seasonal produce, then you select a protein, then a starch, and then a sauce or a spice. So we designed the store with that, where you walk in and it's all the seasonal produce, so you can smell. They actually smell like stuff, which is weird to say, but most grocery stores are antiseptic and don't smell like anything. So when you walk in, you're going to smell warm tomatoes, not warm, but like not hyper refrigerated tomatoes, or you'll smell peaches. You can go up and smell herbs, and they are really flavorful. So start with what's in season and looks great to you. And if you want to design your dish around fennel or zucchini or tomatoes, you can do that. And then next is the protein. So come up to the butcher counter, have a conversation with one of our butchers about what you're thinking about. They'll help you select a cut that matches. Then if you're eating starches, we have things like potatoes that are perishable, but we also have shelf-stable starches, whether it's rice or pastas or whatever, amaranth. There's so many different starches that Americans don't eat, but I think our ancient grains are extremely cool. And then it's a sauce or a spice or both that adds a kind of diversity to your dish. So if you think about it like that, that's makes making seasonal dishes easier, and it's the exact way that we designed a floor plan. So you go through the produce section, then the meat section, then you have starches and spices after that. We have a dessert section too. But the thing that is, I guess, a delightful surprise is we have influencers that come into Radius, take photo shoots, and leave without buying stuff, which part of me is like, come on. But also, it's kind of funny that if you design a really beautiful space, you will have people come in just for marketing purposes to distribute your message.
So they literally would come and take pictures.
Yeah,
That's actually hilarious.
just because it's beautiful
Yeah,
inside.
yeah.
So I'm delightfully surprised that spending so much energy on the layout and the aesthetics is effectively our marketing, because people are so excited to take a picture of the entry table that's beautiful and bountiful.
I did that. I'm not gonna lie. I did that because it was peaches.
Yeah.
And they were beautiful looking, and yeah.
Fresh flowers, all that. So that I knew it was important, but I didn't realize how important it would be to spend time on that. So I'm glad that was a priority.
And it makes sense too, because like again, humans too, you need that nudge, and so having that layout, people aren't even might not be thinking of
Right.
that, but you're kind of helping drive that. That's really cool.
Yeah, I was thinking about basically how do you render the Chipotle conveyor belt into a grocery store? So it's more subtle, as you were saying, but it does guide the shopper through the process of creating a seasonal dish.
Another thing too I want to talk to is just what consumers talk about a lot, which obviously makes sense, is price of food.
Yeah.
Because that's a very challenging thing to talk about online, because especially on Instagram now, I've just noticed a lot of influencers and people in general make just these broad general statements, and consumers latch onto that. So for example, all grain finished beef is bad. So then they're not going to even look at that. Or going back to like pasteurized versus raw, there's just so many examples of that, to where people make these general statements. So then the consumers, do not want to pay for any of that. But then grass-fed finished beef is more expensive. And so here's all of this information going on. It's really confusing the consumer a lot. And then now, whenever you look at the price points, it's very hard for them to decide on all of that too. So how, from your perspective, I don't know if this was marketing or talking with consumers, for them understanding like the price of the food they're buying from you is legit. I mean, it's that for a reason, but what they're buying is really high quality stuff.
Yeah, so I'm going to write a blog post about this, because it is the most common question. So I think articulating our pricing strategy is really important. There's a few layers to this. The first is, by far, our two largest expenses are what we pay to farmers and what we pay to our employees. So in order for us to pay farmers and employees properly, we need to charge a proper amount for our food. So when people complain about, oh, your prices are higher, we're not going to pay our farmers less, and we're not going to pay our employees less. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, going back to nuance, our pricing strategy, I think about it like kind of a tax or subsidy model, where we charge a lot more for premium cuts and use that to subsidize the price of everything else in the store. So in theory, we could charge $40 a pound for our grass-fed, grass-finished ribeyes. But there's only so much supply we have of that, so we charge $62 a pound for our grass-fed, grass-finished ribeyes. And honestly, I think we should charge more because no matter what we charge, people will continue to buy them. And what that does is we take the increased revenue from those cuts, ribeyes, New York strips, filet mignon, and allows us to keep our ground beef prices lower. It allows us to keep our chicken stock prices lower. It allows us to keep our produce prices lower. So we effectively effectively tax rich buyers to subsidize the price of everything else in the store. It also creates a better supply-demand balance. So we're supply limited on ribeyes. In order to reduce demand, you increase the price.
Mm-hmm.
So it balances everything out. So that's the way we approach basically our perishable pricing. In terms of non-perishables, there's a lot less flexibility. And if you buy a spice from us versus a spice from Whole Foods, it's the same exact product, but Whole Foods probably does 10,000 times more volume.
Yeah.
They have a lot more pricing power. Also, don't forget, Whole Foods is owned by Amazon. So we are competing on price versus Amazon. So when people complain about us charging $1 or $2 more for a spice mix, but they also don't want to support Amazon, it's like you kind of have to choose one.
Yep.
I understand price sensitivity and I'm very sympathetic to it. But Whole Foods because of their volume, pays way less for their packaged goods than we do. So there's only so much price competitiveness we can have, and it's difficult. So our pricing is on the non-perishables will be higher than Whole Foods. It's going to be more similar to a Sprouts or a smaller grocery store chain, regional grocery store chain. So that's kind of the pricing philosophy. The even more abstract thing is if you look at what Americans spend on food versus Europeans, it's significantly less.
Yes.
So Europeans are more comfortable paying higher prices for their food. They appreciate the farming practices that go into it. And something that is really important is Europeans spend a lot less money on home prices. So they have a lot more expendable income. So a lot of the American monthly budget goes to paying their mortgage or paying rent and they have less money for food. So it's this really difficult structural problem where I don't know if you really can reduce food prices, but instead you need to find ways to reduce the amount of money Americans are spending on homes instead. So it's like, I'm not gonna be able to solve that problem.
That's why I go back to the culture paradigm shift, because with Europe, they're much more connected to the food. Just their history of agriculture and food. Because that's what's interesting about America. We have rich history of agriculture, but we are so disconnected from our food now.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a very, very tough problem to tackle of just pricing, because now the economics of everything, what we believe what food should be priced at and what it actually is, it's two different things, and consumers don't understand why at all.
Yeah.
And they think that, because that's why I try to also, from like a social media standpoint, try to make statements that get people to think. So for example, people will go buy some Red Bull from a grocery or from a gas station, pay $3.50 say for that, and then if you multiply that to a gallon, it's like $45. But then if they go and see a $20 gallon jug of raw milk, they're like, "What the hell is this?" And so it's just a massive problem, and that's also why just with food, it's one, the food system can, going back to like seasonality and weather dependent and all that, but then two is like margins.
Farmers are not getting rich. Grocery stores are not getting rich.
Grocery stores and farmers are
exactly.
like very low margins.
Yeah, it's tough.
It's so tough. So that's why I'm glad that you brought or talked on that too, because consumers are very demanding too. It's very, with certain farms and ranches, I've just heard all kinds of stories too, to where folks are just making XYZ claim to them about the price. It's just like, that's so, you're just so wrong without realizing it. It's just it's very disrespectful, and they don't, I don't know if they mean to or what, but it's just like whenever someone has $10-12 per pound of ground beef, but then if you go out and visit them and see their operation, you realize they're not doing this to just make bank off of you.
No, definitely not. I think, yeah, it's tough. I mean, I truly empathize with the consumer who is like wants lower prices. I completely understand that. But philosophically, I do think this comes back to land in weird ways. So, as I mentioned already, Europeans don't spend as much money every month on their homes and mortgages, so they have more money for food. I also think most of the value in food systems accrues to land. If you're a farmer that has owned your land for 10, 20 years, you're probably not making very much money every year. You might not be making much money at all, but your land is what is the value. So all of that, all of your wealth accumulates in the land.
Mhm.
It's true for grocery stores too. And this is not widely known, but um, many grocery stores either like there's a real estate asset class called grocery anchored retail. And so if you grew up in the suburbs, you're very familiar with these strip malls where there's a grocery store in the center of it and then you have all these other tenants on the sides. The way that works is either there's a third party developer who owns the strip mall and the grocery store probably doesn't pay any rent or very minimal rent. We, Radius, probably pay more rent than a Whole Foods that is 10 times the size of us because their rent is abated. And the reason for that is the landlord knows that the grocery store is going to bring a tremendous amount of traffic, and that's valuable to the other tenants. So they don't charge rent for the grocery store and they increase the rents on the other tenants.
Wow.
So that's one model. And then
Yeah.
the second model is the grocery store itself owns the real estate development. And then they are capturing the value of all that traffic through the real estate, not through their revenue. Like a grocery store might have 1% margins, but they can have a real estate portfolio worth billions and billions of dollars. So it's interesting that local businesses, the value accrues to the land, not to the business itself.
It's like McDonald's too, right?
Exactly. Like McDonald's franchises, usually the people who run the franchise are wealthy because of the land that they've developed, not because of the franchise itself. But it's really difficult if you don't own the land at all. So
Yep.
if you're a local cafe owner or local restaurant owner and you provide tremendous amount of value to the community, there's more development around the community, your rent goes up because of that. So you get punished for making the surrounding area better. And then your profitability is always capped. So it's a really difficult dynamic where local business owners, if you don't own the land, you're getting punished for your success. So I think that's a underrated structural issue in all of this when we talk about grocery prices. It's actually a lot of the answers are in the land.
I didn't even think about when you just mentioned if you're improving, the prices are going to go up for rent.
Yeah.
Does that happen to a lot of just like local smaller stores, like grocery stores or mom and pop stores?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, cafe owners, bookstore owners, all these places that people really love and create the community. As they make the community better, the landlord will be able to raise the rents. It's tough.
Yeah, that's really tough.
Yeah. So if people are interested in this, I think Henry George is a really interesting, philosopher, political economist from the late 1800s who talked about something called a land value tax and how to fix this problem, which I think is very, very interesting. And I think these theories will become more popular over the next few decades. I hope they do.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything other questions I had. This has been awesome.
Yeah.
I guess you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. What's the vision you have for Radius long term?
Yeah. It goes to what I was talking about before. I think in order to build a sustainable business, you really need to be doing real estate development. So what I hope to do next, if we are able to prove the Radius model works, is to take the concept of grocery anchored retail, which is usually strip malls, and basically flip it on its head in an urban setting. So instead of building horizontally, you build vertically, where Radius is the ground floor anchor tenant, and then there's other wellness-oriented businesses on top. So gyms, acupuncture, therapy, a food court that is all clean, that's what that's where I think this really becomes a great business in addition to healing the food system.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So like, yeah, we're trying to innovate on two layers. One is the food system and really bringing an amazing experience and product to our customers, and kind of showing the way about this way to truly capture the value that you create by owning and developing real estate. Um, so that's the hope, and that would be next, and then hopefully we can build a few of them. We'll see though.
That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess with that, then, if there's any last things that you would like to share or plug, this would be a good time.
Yeah, come visit us. We're at 1912 East 7th Street in Austin, Texas. All of our social handles are at Eat Radius. We've published some cool research studies on sourcing, and we did a very deep dive on what it means to source good chicken, which I think is a topic that has a ton of nuance. But again,
actually, we got some time. Let's actually talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So for chicken, 99.9% of chicken in America is a Cornish cross breed. There have been two separate studies, the Better Chicken Commitment and the Better Chicken Project, that showed that basically that those genetics are unwell and we shouldn't be eating them. And they signed commitments from companies like Burger King and Papa John's and Starbucks to no longer source that breed. I don't think they're going to follow through on that, but just the fact that Burger King signed a commitment that says we will not source Cornish cross anymore.
That's kind of crazy considering their price for chicken nuggets is like the cheapest.
Exactly. So it's amazing that what these studies showed. So that is kind of the starting point where we should be eating chicken that comes from breeds that grow slower. So the issue with Cornish cross is it has a pretty linear growth curve. So it isn't able to develop strong bones and immune system before it puts on weight. So most Cornish cross birds are harvested at like 5 weeks. And if they weren't harvested beyond that, they would either die or not really be able to sustain themselves because their bones can't support the weight of the bird. So there's other breeds like red bros or pioneers that are slower growing, where they don't put on much weight in the beginning. They develop immune systems and strong bones and then put on the muscle after that. So they can be grown a lot longer. They're a lot healthier. Those two studies I mentioned were basically the chicken Olympics, where they would like put the different breeds through different exercises and see how they did. So that's one, is breed you should be focused on. Diet, you really want birds that are eating. All chicken is dependent on feed. I think there's no such, yes, there's pasture-raised chicken, but those pasture-raised chickens are still eating feed. So you want feed that's as clean and as regenerative as possible. And there's a lot more depth there. And then in terms of lifestyle, ideally, in my opinion, chickens, or not my opinion, but chickens are descendant of jungle fowl. So they're really more like tree birds than pasture. They're like, when you think of the American West, historically, you think of bison going through the fields. You don't think of chicken going through the fields. So they're really jungle birds. So I think if they're raised in a more jungle-like setting, that's ideal, whether you create it with trees or tall crops like sorghum or corn. If not, the most common, like good practice is called sleds. So they're basically wind tunnels that are on wheels, and you can move them throughout pastures. So at least the birds are getting access to fresh grass, bugs, seeds every single day. So that's what you want to look for. And then the last thing I would say is age is a pretty good proxy for good farming practices. So if a bird is harvested at 5 weeks of age, which is the standard, it probably means they're a Cornish cross type breed. They're eating feed that's really too energy rich, and then they're in a lifestyle that's more warehouse than pasture raised. So diet, breed, lifestyle, age, and processing. Processing is air chilled versus water chilled. You want air chilled. But these 5 factors are really what you should look for in every type of species that you're sourcing, whether it's chicken, beef, pork, produce too. So far we only have our research essay on chicken up and published, but we're going to publish for all the categories, milk as well. So I think this is what a modern grocery store needs to do. You need to kind of be insane with the level of research that you do, and do the work for the consumer, tell them about it, and then make it convenient to bring it in store.
I love that. Oh, that's so awesome.
Thanks.
Well, it also, even just like the whole chicken thing, because again, going back to like the influencer thing, Carnivore Aurelius 2 days ago made a post on Instagram. He's got a massive following. He made a general blanket statement that all chicken's bad, it's a scam, avoid. It's just like that infuriates me because then you are pushing away consumers from the farmers that are doing it the right way. And going back to the flavor and taste
Yeah.
and the juiciness, a whole chicken done right is incredible. And not just that, from a nutrient standpoint, it's still very, very, very healthy for you. And so, yeah, no, that's why I'm just glad that you are doing all that research to showcase. Because again, going back to consumers, they just latch on to what they're being told. So if they have a store that they're going to buy food from and you release those studies, that is awesome.
I think, and there is a level of nuance, like what you're saying around that tweet is, I don't disagree with what he said. The way that I frame it is there's bad chicken, better chicken, and great chicken. And bad chicken is warehouse raised, eats conventional, terrible feed. Better chicken, there is truly better chicken. They're slow growth breeds, they're raised on pasture, organic feed, ideally has the right omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which means they're not eating corn. I am fine with soy. I know people think there's downsides to soy. I think it has the right omega-6 to omega-3s. If it's raised organically, it's okay. And then, but I will say there is no such thing as great chicken in America. There is in Europe. The La Belle Rouge is kind of the gold standard of how to raise birds. And there's a specific breed. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting it right now. Anyways, there's a specific breed and practice that they do, and it's a great chicken. But in my mind, a chicken raised a great way is as close as we can get to how it would live naturally. So how can we reduce the dependence on feed and get them at more forage? How can we put them in a tree-like environment instead of on a pasture environment? So I think broad blanket statements like that don't help, and it's best to say there are bad practices, there are better practices which exist today, and you can have great practices, and that's what we should strive for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, my issue is the broad statement because consumers latch on to that. Again, going back
Right.
to all, because then it's just adding more confusion. Not on top of that, I mean, the person doesn't even live here and doesn't talk. Yeah, so I don't want to. Yeah, I want to get into a really bad rant with that because that post really infuriated me a lot because consumers latch on to that stuff, and so you're confusing them more. You're not adding into the education at all because there's so much nuance. And if we're wanting to educate the consumers of understanding what food to get and how to go about that research process, well, when you make those blanket statements, it's not helping in that regard.
It doesn't help today, and it doesn't set the stage for building a better food system.
Yes.
I think one of the cool roles that we're playing is we're aggregating demand with informed consumers, and that allows us to work with farmers to safely improve their practices. If we go to a farmer with no customer base and be like, can you raise this different breed of chicken for us? They're going to tell us to get out of here.
Yep.
Versus if we say, we can buy 100 cases of chicken from you a month, will you raise this breed for us? And we aggregate a demand. There's really minimal risk for them in terms of being able to sell the birds. They can change their practices safely. So it's saying we collaborated with Greener Pastures in Central Texas and Elgin, and they have been raising Ross breed, and they have amazing. This farm has amazing practices, and we're working with them to raise slower growing breeds as a trial run. And because we have the customer base, there's another company that they're working with too that has the customer base. They can do practices that they want to do already safely. So yeah, I think it's important to, whenever there's something in the food system that you think can be made better, focus on improving it rather than just saying, I'm never gonna do anything about it. So.
Yeah. Well, because again, we have, as a collective, we can help drive the influence that we want.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly
and
right.
that goes back to like we've just offset personal responsibility. But if we take a little bit of that and over time, thinking long term, that will help really drive the changes that I truly believe we want and need.
I agree. I think this is one of the challenges with laws and regulations are you have much larger organizations, whether they're representing dairy or chicken eggs, whatever it might be, and they are good at lobbying versus grassroots consumers don't have the aggregation power that these lobbyists do. So I think it's a really cool role for a grocery store to play. Is we're kind of a grassroots aggregator and lobby on behalf of the customer. I was at the Texas Capitol with Judith from Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance, lobbying for farming practices that we believe in, like ungraded eggs as an example, different cottage food laws, that I think this generation of consumer who's health conscious and farm and ranch aware really cares about. But it's hard for an individual consumer to make change and advocate, versus if we're aggregating all this demand and interest, we can be advocating on their behalf, which I think is pretty cool. So yeah, I think grocery stores are this really cool union between farming practices, consumer demand, and I take that responsibility really seriously.
I didn't even think about that grassroots movement piece, and that's awesome. That's so true.
Yeah. And people like Judith are absolutely
She's
amazing.
awesome. She's a rock star.
Yeah. So if you're interested in this, the Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance is doing incredible work advocating for farming regulations that definitely you and I believe in, at least.
Definitely. Well, again, thank you so much. This was
Yeah,
awesome.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So again, you can find him at Eat Radius on socials. And if you're in Austin, highly recommend checking this place out because it's the real deal. Food is incredible.
Yeah, thanks.
Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more.